the net. But who was this elusive cabbie? John Warboys was a single man who lived alone in Rotherhithe, South London, overlooking the banks of the Thames.
Warboys was almost a con man in many ways. He was very manipulative and he was very, very good at pretending to be a calm, kind, placid man. And I think many of the young women who got into his cab thought of him as the archetypal black cab driver. Most of his female friends all describe him as the perfect gentleman. He'd stand up the moment a woman walked into the room. He'd send birthday cards, even to ex-girlfriends. He was that kind of very thoughtful man, at least on the surface.
This very much is someone that is very obsessionally predatory and is able to come across as quite avuncular, quite a nice guy, someone's dad.
In his early life, Warboys had an obsession for female company and made the decision, aged 30, to embark on a career which would give him access to women he desired.
He turned to stripping in the sort of mid-80s and was initially very successful. He did it under the name Terry the Minder. He danced to the music from the Dennis Waterman show, and he was earning up to £1,000 a week.
One of the normal guys, nothing out of the ordinary, a bit out of shape and not your typical male stripper, in my opinion. All the other guys around about then in their prime sort of trained a lot, and John didn't look like he sort of done a lot of that.
I first met John, I actually booked in for my niece for her 21st birthday party as a surprise.
And as you guess what, I'm one of those silly strippergrams, right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm rather a big boy, so when I do get it out, duck your head, it's like a Dalek. It's from side to side.
He came in dressed as a dirty old man. He always came out dressed like that, because when the girls actually saw him like that, they used to sort of shy away from him.
Will you be gentle with me, because I'm more scared of you than what you are of me, right?
But then once he took his, like, balaclava off and his clothes and he realised how good looking he was, then they were completely different. All the girls thought he was absolutely fantastic because he was a comedy stripper. He wasn't a serious stripper.
John Warboys might not have been a typical male stripper, but his intentions were clear.
He was a womaniser, definitely. His act was get in amongst the girls, get the lotion out, get the bananas out, get the fresh cream out. It's someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, but they're using the job to meet women and get amongst the women.
When he was stripping, he loved the attention, he loved getting involved, he loved the after-show party where he would ply women with drink and have sex with them.
In 1991, Warboys met and married Jean Clayton, but this didn't stop him trying to procure intoxicated women.
His ex-wife has spoken about how he would follow drunk women home, even during his marriage, hoping to have sex with them.
The marriage broke down in 1995 after turning violent and abusive. Incredibly, even at this time, Warboys had started to experiment with ways of incapacitating women. Jan Reynolds went out for a date with Warboys after one of his shows.
After we'd spent the evening out, we came back to his place. We then, which I never do on a first date, never, but because he was so irresistible, we had a sexual relationship.
After a successful first date, Jan hadn't heard anything for several weeks, but eventually Warboys got in touch to arrange a second meeting. Only this time, he had something more sinister in mind.
On the second date, he cooked a meal for me, and after I'd had 2 or 3 glasses of wine, I felt quite woozy, lightheaded. I felt ill. I never knew anything else whatsoever, not at all, until I woke up the next morning in his bed. And I asked him how I got there. He sort of laughed and chuckled and said, "You'd had quite a bit to drink last night." And I said to him, "No way." It was only about 2 or 3 glasses of wine, but I knew then that there was something not quite right. I felt very angry, very ashamed going home on the bus, to think that he could have done something to my drink.
I would suspect there are many other instances in the early part of that offending history where he tried various routines out on women until gradually they were more and more refined. and got more and more specific and more effective, essentially. I mean, practice makes perfect, if you like.
Warboys was honing his methodology, but at the same time, work as a stripper became harder to come by, and with it, his easy access to women.
Over time, his looks faded. He got older, and the money dried up, and also the access to women, particularly drunk women, dried up.
It must have been a bit of a blow to John. His phone probably stopped ringing. He's probably missed it like hell, the attention.
In desperation, he began to finance and star in low-budget porn films from a flat he owned in Bournemouth.
Neighbours at the time who remembered a string of women sort of turning up at this flat without an explanation, very strange sounds coming from inside.
In 1996, Warboys decided to change careers. A job which would give him access to the females he craved. He began training to become a black cab driver.
What is entirely plausible in this case is, as you have with some paedophiles, who will go into employment with the specific aim of using that as a direct conduit to victims, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Warboys saw becoming a black cab driver as a very opportune employment device to procure specific types of victims.
One sense that it was his whole life, that his whole mission was not necessarily to be a taxi driver and earn proper money, but to use his employment in order to satisfy his perverted lust.
Warboys had seemingly embarked on a job which gave him one-on-one access to the type of females he desired. But how was it possible for him to get women to do what he wanted?
Mr. Warboys was not an aggressive man. He was an extremely mild-mannered man. To achieve his aims, he was never going to run up behind somebody and drag them off the streets. So therefore, to achieve his aim, which was sexual, he had to think up a way in which his victims were going to be complicit in what he wanted.
Most rapists want some form of reaction from their victims. I think what is quite unusual about Warboys is he wanted pretty much prone, unconscious victims. So no interaction or reaction at all at either a physical level or an emotional level.
John Warboys had been experimenting with drugging women and had discovered a potent cocktail using easily obtainable over-the-counter pharmaceuticals.
One drug was used. In some cases, more than one. There'd been a combination of two drugs. One of those was an over-the-counter medication for insomnia. The other would be a prescription-only drug.
The amount of alcohol with those two drugs, the combination effect effectively, for a number of women was very, very severe. Not only did it make them totally incapacitated in the cab and completely unconscious, but very sick the following day. And that, of course, is the seriousness of the crime, that for a whole number of women, they're not sure what happened to them in the back of that cab.
Warboys' first known offence was in 2002, but 5 years later, there was no sign of him slowing up. More and more victims at the mercy of this cabbie and his drugged drinks. One woman was to experience just how potent Warboys' drug cocktail was. After a night out with friends in West London, she was making her way home. She's prepared to speak, but doesn't want to reveal her identity.
This black taxi pulls up beside me, and it was a really strange thing because I hadn't hailed it, but I just got in it. He immediately kind of went into this rant about, you don't want to get into a minicab, I saw you, I thought it's late, you're on your own, you look like a nice girl. He said that several times, you look like a nice girl, you seem like a really nice girl. He started telling me about this win that he'd had, and then I remember he sort of put his hand down to the left and sort of pulled up this wad of cash, and I really remember it being a lot of money, but it didn't register with me as sinister at that point. I just remember thinking, oh, I'm going to tell my mates about this tomorrow. They won't believe I've had this crazy taxi driver. He'd been waiting to kind of celebrate with someone, hadn't had anyone to celebrate with, and he wondered if I wanted to drink. I thought, yeah, I'll have a drink.
As the taxi got near to the woman's home, the cabbie pulled up in a dark and deserted part of the street.
I remember saying something like, "Why are we going this way? What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just going to pull up here and have a little drink with you, and then I'll take you back to your flat." The last thing I remember him doing was getting out of the front of the taxi and getting into the back with me. I remember this feeling of sort of slipping into a sort of unconsciousness and thinking, yeah, this isn't good. My next memory is 2 o'clock the next afternoon, waking up fully clothed with my shoes still on. Work had been ringing me. My boyfriend had been trying to get in touch, and I'd just been totally out of it.
Unbeknown to her, Warboys had let himself into her flat. He then woke up her boyfriend and told him to get his girlfriend out of the cab as she'd had too much to drink.
I'm pretty sure that nothing happened to me in the back of the taxi. I can't be 100%, partly because I woke up fully clothed. I had tights and knee-high boots on, and they didn't appear to have been interfered with in any way.
She was unconscious for over 10 hours, but the drugs may have had an unintentional side effect that deterred Warboys from carrying out an attack.
What was really strange to me when I woke up the next day is that I realised that I'd wet myself. My boyfriend actually told me that I'd wet myself in the back of the taxi. Obviously, it was definitely down to the drugs that he'd given me, but could have been what saved me from something a lot worse, I think.
Despite this, her experience at the hands of Warboys still haunts her.
If anything traumatises me, it's the fact that it was such a hugely risky situation where so much more could have gone wrong and so much more could have happened to me. And I could have been seriously hurt. I'll never know what happened to me in the back of that taxi.
Like many victims, this woman felt too embarrassed to contact police at the time. Warboys continued undetected, but he began to do more to cover his tracks.
He started to give himself an alibi after he committed a crime. On one occasion, he dropped his victim off at a police station, saying she was drunk. This was all because he realised that if he was stopped or caught again, he'd have a lot of explaining to do.
I don't think there is any indication that he'd slowed down in his offending.
Gradually over time, if you're not getting caught, there's no particular or evident repercussions, you'll repeat it. If it's effective, you'll do it again and again and again and again. It might get more specific, but it also might get more audacious.
Despite his numerous attacks, police were still unaware there was a serial sex attacker. In December 2007, all this was about to change.
There was evidence for a number of the women that they'd been drugged. There was evidence that they'd been sexually assaulted. But only in one case did the evidence amount to a woman having a recollection of rape having actually occurred.
Towards the end of 2007, police were still unaware they were dealing with a sexual predator driving a black cab. But John Warboys was continuing to assault women all over the Greater London area. In December of that year, one attack would prove crucial. A young lady was out with a friend to celebrate a birthday and decided to share a cab home.
They'd been in central London. It was about 4 o'clock, and they were in the Oxford Street area when two of them got into Mr. Warboys' cab. Mr. Warboys, as was quite common, dropped the other lady off first, leaving him alone with this particular lady.
Once the victim's friend had got out of the cab, Warboys began by appearing to innocently ask the young woman for her exact address.
It's been a common feature that Mr. Warboys asked the victims where they lived as they got into the cab. After he'd given them drink, they got progressively worse, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to communicate with them by the time he got them home.
Once he had established her destination, he could begin his usual routine.